ESPN, and I am in no way affiliated with ESPN. They're not paying me for this. I receive nothing from them, so keep that in mind. This is ESPN.com's homepage. This is Monday morning, September the 2nd, and the front page of ESPN is where do you draft Jimmy Graham in your fantasy league. So that's how big fantasy football has become. I just wanted you to see that. So if you haven't watched my previous videos, watch them first. I'm trying to build a base of knowledge for those that don't know how to play fantasy football at all. So watch the first 3 videos before you get to this one. So we're going to continue with this one where we left off with the last one. You're going to go to, if you already have a fantasy team, you go to fantasy football. If you don't have a fantasy team, this is where you're going to go anyway to get one. The one I'm using to illustrate is this San Francisco head-to-head points league. And I explained the scoreboard section can show you head-to-head who you're going against in a given week. So, again, these guys generally aren't on the field at the same time. They're not in the same game. They put up stats, they perform, they play, and you are awarded fantasy points for that performance. So back to league and settings where the points distribution is broken down for you. I left miscellaneous off because it takes a lot of time to explain. The reality is those guys in your starting lineup, they can score points. Generally, see, these are all touchdowns. Punt return for touchdowns, return for touchdowns, blocked punt or field goal return for touchdowns, interceptions return for touchdowns, fumbles and kickoffs returned for touchdowns. Your players can score touchdowns in any of these ways, but they're not really covered in the passing, rushing, or receiving section. For example, I'm a Patriots fan, so I'll use a Patriots example. Let's say Stephen Ridley rushes the ball, fumbles it, and Danny Amendola picks it up and runs it in for a touchdown. Now, Danny Amendola wouldn't get rushing points for that because it's not a rush. He wouldn't get receiving yards for that because he didn't receive it. But he would get 6 points for recovering a touchdown. So there are instances, at least back in the day before this miscellaneous section was part of the game, you would have players return kickoffs. But that wouldn't be covered in the rushing, receiving, or passing section. So this is fairly new. So you will have guys in your lineup that are capable of scoring points in these ways. Deshaun Jackson returns punts. Anybody can recover a fumble for a touchdown. Actually, this one's here twice. Fumble returned, touchdown, fumble recovered for touchdown. I believe that's the same thing. But the point is this. You can score points in passing, rushing, receiving, kicking, and then these miscellaneous ways. Now, the team defense and special teams, this is a little different. There are leagues where you can pick individual defensive players. ESPN standard leagues play team defense and special teams, and I kind of prefer that. And you'll see that most everywhere. So you draft an entire team in their defense and their special teams. So the first sack, that's easy. If you have New England's defense and New England's defense gets a sack, you get 1 point. New England's defense intercepts a pass and returns it for a touchdown, you get 6 points. Fumble return for touchdown. Kickoff return for touchdown. That's the special teams portion. Block, punt, field goal, or point after attempt, or try. You get points for that. Interceptions, safeties, fumbles recovered. You get points for that. Now, this part here is actually two separate parts. One is the points allowed, and one is the yards allowed. If New England allows 0 points, you get 5 points for that. If they allow between 1 and 6 points, you get 4 points for that. And you can see it gets smaller the more points you allow, or your defense or special teams allows, and you even lose points if you give up on it. If your defense gives up 46 or more points, you lose 5 points. As well, you should. The second part of this is yards allowed. And if you give up less than 100 yards, if I have New England's defense and throughout the course of the game they give up less than 100 total yards, which is almost impossible, you get 5 points. And you see it progresses lower and lower and then into negative territory as well. Where if you give up 550 plus yards, you lose 7 points for that. And again, as well you should. A little bit about roster construction here. Again, this is an ESPN standard league, a 10-team standard league. So, ESPN 10-team standard leagues, you start. Now, let me explain to you the difference between starting and being on the bench. And you should already have an idea of that. If you start, you start. If you're on the bench, you are on the bench and you cannot produce from the bench. So, ESPN allows you to start 1 quarterback. It allows you to start 2 running backs. It allows you to start 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end. Flex allows you to start either a running back, either a wide receiver, or a tight end in that flex spot. See here where it's in your quarterback spot, you can only start quarterbacks. All the way down, and then you get to the flex spot where you'd have flexibility to start who you want. You can start anybody that's designated as one of these 3 positions. You start 1 defense or special teams. You start 1 kicker. And you have a bench consisting of 7 players. Anybody you want. There is a restriction on what position they play only based on this standard format has a maximum number of players at each position you can own. You can only have 8 running backs on the roster, 4 quarterbacks, 8 wide receivers, 3 tight ends. This is not applicable. So you can have as long as your running back, wide receiver, and tight ends don't exceed these numbers here, you can have as many flex guys as you want because there's not enough bench spots to go over the limit. 3 defenses and 3 kickers. So different leagues on ESPN and then different leagues on different platforms. They have different roster requirements, different starters, more starters, less starters, more starters at certain positions, less starters at certain positions, more positions, more maximums, less maximums, no maximums. This is just standard ESPN scoring in a standard league. And these are the requirements. If you want to create your own league, you can do that, and then you can adjust all of this any way you want. I don't like that. In regular football, you can score points 4 ways. You score a touchdown, you kick a field goal, you get a safety, you kick an extra point. There's this many ways to score points in fantasy football, and you can make this list a lot longer. And it's some leagues that I've been in, the list is just so ridiculously long that it's hard to go into a draft and assembling a team when you have to consider all these different scoring categories. And I'll get into that at a later date. But here's what you need to know. This is your roster requirements. And actually, you don't have to start anybody. But you can't win if you don't start, guys. I'm going to wrap this one up.